Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Blackstone River Greenway Phase 1, Segment 2 Public Information Meeting. My name is Stella Lensing. I'm with a Greenways and Trails Planner with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. We're going to wait a few more minutes to see if anybody else joins our meeting before we begin. Okay, so I believe we may have admitted everybody from the lobby. And once again, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Stella Lansing. I'm a Trails and Greenways planner with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And I will be introducing the project. And with me this evening, I'd also like to welcome Dan Cushing, our Director of Public Engagement. Gerald Ortler, Director of Trails and Greenways, Dan Driscoll, Director of Green Transportation, and then with me on our design team, we have Patricia Domigan, Civil Engineer and Project Manager from VHB, Scott Bruner, Civil Engineer and Project Manager from VHB, Michael McCall, Structural Engineer from Stantec, Carly Soderholm, Structural Engineer from Stantec, Rick Williams, landscape architect from IBI, and Jeffrey Bittenbender, landscape architect from IBI. And with that, we can move to the next slide. Just to let you know that this is a virtual public meeting which is recorded. DCR may choose to retain and distribute the video, still images, audio, and or chat transcript. By continuing attendance with this virtual public meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. If you are not comfortable being recorded, please turn off your camera, keep your microphone muted, and refrain from chatting in the transcript box. Your microphone and webcam are automatically muted upon entering this meeting. The meeting will be open to questions and answers at the end of the formal presentation. Um, we would like to start off as well by thanking the Baker Polito administration, our secretary Kathleen Theoharides, and DCR's Commissioner Jim Montgomery. At this time, we'd like to also remind you of DCR's mission statement to protect, promote, and enhance our Commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. And at this time, I would like to hand it over to Dan Driscoll, Director of Green Transportation, to further present on the Blackstone Greenway.
Thank you, Stella, and good evening, everyone. We're really excited to be here to to show you the work that we have done a little bit, but also this important critical phase, which we're calling Segment 1, Phase 2, which is really the connection to all the good work that's happened in Rhode Island. This project has been over a 20-year effort. It really began in 1986 when the there was a designation of the Blackstone River Corridor as a National Heritage Corridor due to all of its important role in both the birth of the Industrial Revolution in this country and all the rich cultural resources that lie along its entire length in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. What you see here is a Blackstone Greenway timeline. You can see it does go back over 20 years when a planning study started in 1996. Both DOT, the Department of Transportation, and the DCR, which is the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as you can see in our logo, started design work on what we're going to call segments 3, 4, and 5, as well as segment 2. We'll show a map of that in a few slides, but those segments are, we're still focused on them, but they prove to be particularly complicated, both in terms of land acquisition and environmental challenges. So we did move on to other phases that we thought we could get a higher success initially, but we have not abandoned those phases where we're still working with partners and advocates to see the best way to move them forward. So what we then began what we're calling Segment 1, Phase 1, back in 2009, designing that with all of its bridges as well as the Greenway segment. We began building that in 2016 and opening it in 2018 and 19. And we began to actually design Segment 1, Phase 2, which we'll be going through in detail in 2019. And you can see we did build the Canal Street Bridge actually in 2020 as well, our most recent accomplishment. Next slide, please. This is segment 1, both phase 1 and phase 2 are shown on this. Everything you see in yellow, including 8 bridges and a tunnel, the bridges and tunnel are represented here by the blue and pink boxes. What is called phase 2 is at the end of this segment where you see those 3 round circles. We'll be giving you a lot of detail on that in the images to come. But this entire 3.6 mile segment from Route 146A in Uxbridge all the way through Millville back into Blackstone, where it ends at the St. Paul Street Bridge, has all been completed at a cost of near $23 million. It is one of the more comprehensive and complex segments of Greenway that we've ever built in the Commonwealth in terms of the number of bridges over that sort of span, which is why we've invested the $23 million. It's also one of the highest investments we've made in communities on a Greenway of this type, and we're proud of that, and we think it was completely worth it. Next slide. This is some of the imagery that you see out there along segment 1 in phase 1. The granite entry pillars, these have become a symbol of our greenways throughout both the metropolitan region and as well as the state. They've been a great success of showing motorists and others that there's a new greenway here worth going out and exploring and enjoying. They also clearly mark where the crossings are and the major entries to all the facilities. We also, where possible, we like to add family-friendly amenities like this small playground that you see here, both to serve the local neighborhood that can walk here with their children, but also to maybe give your younger children a motivation to get on their bikes with you, to come out and have a place to stop and play for a little while. And you can also see there's events and rides out here that take place, as you see in the lower left. Next. Just some more of the imagery. That's the tunnel I mentioned. This is a tunnel that goes under Church Street. This area here was buried to about half the height of that tunnel. So this was quite an effort to do a full restoration and a sort of recovery of a historic railroad tunnel that had been filled in. this was a big piece of work that came out really nice. You can also see one of the bridges in the corner and some of our interpretive boulders. We like to do sort of folksy, fun interpretation in some of our corridors like this. And this is a fun way to show people and children what kind of animals are both in the river and along the Greenway. Next slide. Again, the pillar, we chose the locomotive as kind of our mascot out here to both symbolize the cultural importance and significance of this area, but also to remind people that this was a double-tracked railroad, and leaving symbols of that wherever we can to remind people of that is an important piece of it. In the lower left corner, that's actually one of 3 parking spots that you can come to, parking lots. That one is in Millville. You can also park at the old depot just up past the administration building in Blackstone off Canal Street. And there's a third parking lot down off 146A. So really excellent access for an ability for people to park and enjoy this 3.7 miles, which has been really popular. And there's another one of the bridges as well. Next. This is the Triad Bridge, one of the more significant pieces of work that DCR was able to complete out here with the same consultant team that's on this call tonight in this meeting. They also worked on all of the design of these bridges. Stantec and VHB did exceptional work for us out here. And I really just want to highlight on this slide that DCR really went out of its way to do high-end work. These bridges are really difficult to get to as far from a construction perspective. So we built what we feel is really a 30-year maintenance-free bridge. We used epay on the decking, which is the hardest wood on planet Earth. You can see the railings are Boston patent fencing. I mean, that fencing is some of it, I think by today's pricing, it's up over $400 a linear foot. But also it's incredibly durable and strong, as well as the benches made out of epay. And the entire superstructure of all of these bridges has been fully restored, painted, all of the abutments repointed. And I just want to highlight that this was a project that we, in a sense, spared no expense to do it as high quality and as low maintenance as we could. Next slide. So here's the 7 segments that I mentioned. I'll go through these quickly just for a quick status update. Let's start up in the Worcester area. Segment 7 has been ongoing by DOT. There's design going on here. A piece of that has been built, and there's a new visitor center up there that serves this entire Greenway corridor, and that really came out exceptional. If you haven't had a chance to go up and take a look at the new visitor center, which talks about all of the rich cultural history as well as the natural history of this wonderful river corridor. Segment 6 was completed in 2008. That was built as some mitigation from DOT from a highway project. It's a 4-mile segment. It has its own parking lot in Millbury, and that's been very successful. But you know, a lot of people, 4 miles up and back is about as much as they want a bike, especially if you have a family or small children. So a lot of these sections, while they're not interconnected yet, they do have a really high viability and functionality for family recreation by themselves. Segments 3, 4, and 5, that 13-mile section is one that we need to come back out and revisit. When we started designing that a number of years ago, we ran into a lot of environmental challenges that are going to be, you know, quite difficult to overcome, but we're committed to try to reevaluate that and look at it closer moving forward. Segment 2 is another section that we did a feasibility study on. That goes from 146A, 4 miles to the DCR Riverbend Farm. That's a section that we really want to work with the Park Service and other advocates to try to advance, because we think it would be wonderful to be able to get to Riverbend Farm. That's one of our signature parks, DCR parks, and another visitor center along this corridor. And it has a lot of great historic and cultural elements. In the interim, what we have been doing is, where that pointer is right now, we've continued on the SNET toward Connecticut. where we are doing design work to try to continue the trail on the portion that DCR owns in its entirety to connect into Connecticut to some of the great greenway work they've done. So this is really a tri-state greenway network between Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And you can see there the green section that's complete and the little blue section that we're really here to get into some detail with you tonight. Next slide. Down in Rhode Island, they've been quite busy as well. As I said, the vision of this entire project was to go from Worcester to Providence. That's the heritage corridor of the Blackstone. It's a 48-mile corridor. 28 miles of it is in Massachusetts that we just looked at. 20 miles of it is in Rhode Island. Rhode Island ran into a little bit less challenge on the environmental front in their work and have been able to advance a bit more than Massachusetts to date, although we are catching up, and it's a partnership. We're not racing each other, but they've done an excellent job in Rhode Island. And this is all named after John H. Chafee, a great congressman from the state of Rhode Island that the entire heritage corridor has been named after. So Rhode Island right now, of their 20 miles, has finished about 16, 17 miles. Everything pretty much in purple, green, and blue. Got down to Providence. The orange section to the north, that's the Woonsocket piece that they're currently still working on. And so they're real close to connecting all of this from Massachusetts all the way to Providence. Next slide. And the last thing is segment 1, phase 2. This is a close-up of it, and Patricia Domigan from VHB is going to cover a lot of the details on this in a couple of more slides.
Thanks, Dan. What this slide represents is where the phase 1 ends, which is at St. Paul Street. So what this slide shows is that the connection from phase 1 will go over the single span and the 7-span viaduct, wrap around the Blackstone recycling area, and then tie into Rhode Island. This dashed line here is Rhode Island here. The project, phase 2 project, is about a half a mile long. We wanted to show you some of the pictures. I'm sure you've been out there, but the picture that connects into Rhode Island is quite breathtaking. The bridge that's over the Blackstone River has been completed by the state of Rhode Island, and this project will tie into the Rhode Island section. This paved surface right here is the bikeway that has been completed in Rhode Island, and the intent is to build the Massachusetts section of the Greenway up to the Rhode Island border, and this just shows the bound where the Rhode Island border is. So the scope of work of the segment 1 phase 2 is going to mimic essentially the first phase of the project. It's going to be a 10-foot wide paved surface for the Greenway with shoulders and plantings along the area. It's going to go, as I mentioned, from St. Paul Street to the Rhode Island state line. The intent is to make sure that the Greenway is completely ADA accessible. So it's going to be a universal allowance of everyone to use the Greenway itself. The work is also going to rehabilitate the single span and the 7-span viaducts. What's going to happen is the facade is going to get repaired. Some of the concrete spalling is also going to get repaired, and the drainage system is also going to get rehabilitated. Mike McCall will be going into a little bit more detail later in the presentation. This phase also will improve the habitat that surrounds the Blackstone River, as well as create overlooks so that you can see the beauty of the Blackstone River. This slide here is just showing some of the improvements on a rendered scale that has been planned for this section. As you can see where the St. Paul Street Park is, right now this is a paved surface. The Greenway has been constructed here, as well as the Canal Street Bridge. There's going to be more amenities, and the chain link fence that surrounds the park itself, the construction fencing, will be removed. There will be benches and picnic tables installed, as well as an area for people to park their bikes. Plantings, of course, are all going to be installed along the entire Greenway. The greenway itself is going to go over the viaducts. As you can see here, there's going to be some slope revetment. There's going to be some improvements done to the slope and to the areas on top of the viaducts themselves. This plan view is showing how the greenway is actually going to be going from the viaduct all the way down to the Blackstone River and then wrap around the recycle area for the town of Blackstone. This is going to be a slope. We're removing a lot of material that's in here from the former railroad embankment so that this can be an accessible profile that goes down from the viaducts themselves to the Blackstone River. There will be plantings installed and a lot of screening so that there's just going to be a lot of plantings within the riverfront of the Blackstone River as part of this project. What this graphic also shows is an overlook and a connection to the ball fields at the Blackstone town campus. So this is a typical section of the greenway itself. What this is it's a slice of the greenway that's going from the viaducts down to the river itself. You can see this dashed line where it says existing ground. That's where the embankment is right now. And as part of the project, a lot of material will be removed so that the greenway itself can be a slope that people will be able to transverse. So you'll be able to go down on the slope on the greenway to the river and then from the river up on the viaducts. To do that, we want to minimize the amount of fill that we have to remove. So we're going to slope some of the embankment back up again and have almost berms on either side of the cross section. And that will be planted, or there'll be stone revetment put on top of it. And there'll be also drainage swales that will be installed on either side of the greenway. This is a typical section if you cut a slice of the greenway right at the river itself. And the reason why we wanted to show this is we wanted to make sure that we articulated that there really isn't going to be any change to the ground elevation along the river. We didn't want to fill in any of the riverfront or any of the floodplain that's associated with the Blackstone River, understanding how much the river itself crests. Mike McCall from Stantec will talk a little bit about the single and the 7-span viaduct rehabilitation. Mike?
Thanks, Trish. This slide is showing the single span viaduct. It's an interruption to the embankment that it, along with the 7-span viaduct, were built to allow the mill races and infrastructure of the old mill complex and community to function through that embankment. Next slide, please. This is the view of the 7-span viaduct. The original construction of the viaduct in 1872 was a series of stone arches and sidewalls, which we call the spandrel walls, which go up from the arch to the top. And as you can see, it's currently a concrete face structure. There was apparently some distress in the original stone construction around the time of the early 20th century. And in 1918, the railroad faced the entire stone masonry structure with 16 inches of reinforced concrete. So what we're seeing here is the current condition of the reinforced concrete, which is in rather poor condition. And that's one of the problems that this project will address. Next. Just some close-ups of the existing concrete conditions. The picture on the left showing an extremely deteriorated area. Those rods going into the concrete and coming out of it, the reinforcing bars that strengthen the concrete. And on the right, you can see an area of variable conditions, which is kind of typical of the conditions throughout the viaduct. There's some areas of sound, good concrete, and some very poor areas. So our approach to the underside of the arches will be to take advantage of the sound concrete and leave what we can, and uh, and just remove and replace the deteriorated concrete. Next slide. This is some photos of the arch that Mill Street and Farnham Street go through. Uh, this was also in very poor condition, and for a time, it actually had some construction debris netting under it to catch any loose concrete that might fall onto the roadway. Uh, and in 2015, DCR had a very detailed study, engineering study done on the condition of the viaducts. And uh, contrary to some previous engineering opinions, uh, this more detailed study found that uh, the structures could be fully rehabilitated and made completely safe. And so in 2016, the DCR did a small project at the Mill Street Arch, which you see the results of here, where again, spot repairs were done on the underside of the arch. And in this case, also spot repairs were done on the spandrel walls on the outer faces. Uh, our project will take a similar approach to the underside of the arches in doing the more targeted repairs, but the more visible outer faces will have at least 6 inches of concrete removed uh, and replaced with new concrete. That will give a very uniform appearance as well as structural integrity. Next slide. One of the problems with the existing viaducts is that, uh, as you can see, this is the view from on top with the old railroad bed, uh, with the tracks now long removed and nature sort of taking over. There's a lot of vegetation and small trees even growing up there. And when it rains, the rain just goes into this soil that's above the arches, and it drains through the soil and gets into the uh, the old stonework that's hidden, and then eventually into the uh, concrete facing. And the problem with moisture getting into concrete is that it causes it to deteriorate in a number of ways. Probably the most significant are uh, when the water gets into cracks in the concrete, it can freeze and thaw, and that sort of pries the cracks apart and causes deterioration of the concrete. And it also gets in and corrodes the reinforcing bars. And when that happens, the bars expand and push out on the concrete and cause additional spalling. So our project is going to address this sort of fundamental issue of uh, correcting the drainage on top here of the viaducts. Next slide. And this is a cross section of the repaired viaducts. Same approach is being taken at the single span and the 7 span, where if we sort of focus in on the underside of the arches a little lower. Those are the areas that are showing spot repairs, targeted repairs of the deteriorated concrete on the underside of the arches. And then if we go to the outside walls above the arches, you can see the minimum 6-inch full replacement from the arch all the way up to the top of the wall, which is going to be a completely rebuilt reinforced concrete parapet with a Boston pattern rail on top. So as you saw in the previous picture, there's currently a deteriorated parapet with no railing. So the new structure will have these safe pedestrian railings on both sides. Contained within those spandrel walls is the soil that will support the vegetation along the outsides of the path and the paved path itself towards the middle of the cross section there. Our landscape architects need sort of a minimum of 2 feet of soil to get their plantings to grow. And part of the process of being able to do that is removing some of the stone sidewalls that that exist under the existing soil. And Rick Williams will be talking about sort of a creative approach to using that excess stone that's going to be removed on top of the viaduct in the landscaping of the pathway going from the viaduct down towards the river. But the key feature that will protect the structural integrity of this repaired historic structure is this buried slab that we see under the soil and above the existing structure. And that is a reinforced concrete slab that slopes down to a reinforced concrete trough towards the middle of the cross section there, which is filled with crushed stone and a perforated drainage pipe that runs the full length of each viaduct and ties into the drainage system of the trail beyond the viaduct. So that is a very robust approach to dealing with the fundamental problem that has caused the deterioration. And we think this will prevent the water from getting into the structure in the future and providing a long-term structurally robust rehabilitation of these great historic structures. Next. And I'll turn it over to you now, Rick.
All right, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. I'm going to focus my discussion really from the viaducts down to the riverfront park and to essentially the Rhode Island state line. As Trish mentioned earlier, once we cross over and pass over the viaducts, we have a 35 vertical foot drop that we need to make from the viaduct level down to the riverfront park elevation. So it's a pretty significant drop. I think we're doing it in roughly 2,300 linear feet. And it's approximately 3.5 to 4% slope. So all of it is ADA compliant. We have several locations kind of along the trail where you can pull off and pause because it is a long distance. And then there's also, as you're kind of working your way down the trail, there's a spur path that takes you off and climbs back up a little bit to the Overlook, which is kind of symbolized there in the pink. And then from that, there's also another little connector path that takes you back down into Roosevelt Park, which is a connection that doesn't currently exist today, other than this small little cow path along the side of the embankment. So, I mean, one of the things that we wanted to do in this small little area is to, make some significant landscape gestures that kind of harken back the historic significance of the viaducts. And one way of doing that is what you're seeing in plan are these gray kind of crescent shaped slices, almost like orange slices, as you're walking down the path. It starts on the left side right after you come off the viaduct, and they start to grow in size as you go down. And the reason they're growing is because they're holding up more embankment as you traverse down through the middle of it with the path. And I'll get into a little bit more about how those work and what they're made of. But while I'm on this slide, I just wanted to also point out the significant amount of planting improvements that we're making, kind of intermingling between what's existing out there that is good material, that's native, that want to remain. We are doing a significant amount of planting to help screen kind of that DPW stockpile yard and focus everybody's energy and attention out to the Blackstone River, both up and downstream from the Overlook. If we go to the next slide. So the first thing here is this cut slope stone embankment. So the perspective on the left is really kind of the vision of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, it's doing a lot of different things. It's holding back some of the existing soil so we don't have to dispose of it. It's also preserving that land so that if there are existing trees on it, we can preserve those existing trees. We don't have to cut them. That means less that we have to replant. But the stone itself, we're planning to use this stockpiled stone that we're going to gather from the removal of some of the ballast stone that's in those existing viaduct structures. Through some of the test digs that we've done, we've proven that there is stone down there that can be removed, which will help lighten up the structure and provide the space for essentially the waterproofing slab and the planting subsoils that we're going to need out there to grow plants on top of this structure. So what we're trying to do is we're using a regular coursing within the stone because we're trying to essentially signify it's an architectural element. It's harkening back to the architectural kind of historic character of the stone coursing that was done on the arches themselves. Next slide. This one is just the Blackstone River Overlook. A little bit more detail of what's going on there. Essentially, this is the old center line, that the green that you're seeing there is shrubs, and those kind of alternating hatched, what looks like a crosswalk, is representing in unit pavers, similar to what's in the upper right photo. An alternating kind of color scheme will suggest that was the old rail ties. This was the center line of the old rail line as it went over the Blackstone River, and there was an abutment there. Just off the aerial photograph in the top right corner, you can see just the glimpse of the center abutment that still resides out in the middle of the river. So this is a representation of what was there, trying to represent the abutment block, which we're going to use kind of the large reclaimed blocks that you're kind of seeing in the bottom right picture, and then using again the high quality materials that we used in segment 1 out here again. This will be a pretty significant overlook for both upstream and downstream views. We'll set up a nice shot down over the Rhode Island line as well. We go to the next slide. Just the last little comment on planting. There's a lot of invasives out there on this bank because it was essentially a kind of a gravel fill, essential embankment that was used to create this. So a lot of invasives have come in there because it's difficult to grow material. So we're trying to reintroduce the native palette to essentially one, make it more palatable for the local fauna, to be able to use it as a corridor like we're using for people. It's also going to increase the planting diversity that's lacking out there right now, and then obviously trying to create interest for all four seasons and make sure that we're creating places for animals to hide, eat, so forth. So this is just a sampling of some of the plants that we're planning on using. And next slide, I think I'm turning it back over to Stella.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So I just wanted to let you know where we are currently in the project. We are at final design. We have our permits, and we are almost ready to bid, but we need a couple of temporary easements, and we also have a permanent easement secured from the town. And at this time, our project is estimated at a construction cost of about $9 million. And then I'll turn it back over to Dan Cushing, who will provide you with some information on how you can get in touch with us.
Thanks, Stella, and thanks to the whole project team. So that concludes the presentation portion of tonight's meeting. We're very grateful that you are spending your evening with us to watch this presentation and participate in our Q&A. So our Q&A is going to be right after I go through some of our additional information, but just as a preview, you can raise your hand using the Teams function at the top, or you can type in your question in the chat, which is the chat bubble, which you'll also see in the Teams icons. So with that, I'll start talking about the additional information. So this meeting was recorded. You're going to be able to find both the recording and the slide deck at mass.gov/DCR/past-public-meetings. There's also going to be an open public comment period so that we can take in feedback about tonight's presentation and about the design. So you can find the place to submit your comments at mass.gov/DCR/public-comment. And we put a deadline on the public comment period on Tuesday, September 28th. That's 2 weeks out from today. And just a note, we do ask for some of your information in those forms, but that would mostly just be used for future contact. For any additional questions or concerns with DCR, just for general information or public related listservs, you can email our Office of Community Relations at mass.parks@mass.gov. Next slide. So with that, we're going to open it up for questions. In the event that there aren't too many questions, we will end the meeting early, but I want to give room for everyone that's currently in the chat rooms to facilitate any questions. So again, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, or you can hit Control-Shift-K. So that the two ways to raise your hand. There's also a chat function at the top inside the Teams menu, which you can post your question. But again, if there are no questions for tonight, we understand you have the ability to submit public comment. Tricia, do you think you could go back a slide just so that we can leave the information up for everyone? Thanks. So, so I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see anyone participating in the chat. So I'm just going to go through the additional information again, and then I think we're going to conclude tonight's meeting if there are no questions. So again, the recording and the slide deck are going to be on our website. You can submit public comments for the next 2 weeks. And any additional information, please reach out to mass.parks@mass.gov. Okay, with that, I guess I will thank the project team. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. And let us know if you have any questions regarding the project or any other inquiries with DCR. So, all right, I'm going to conclude tonight's meeting. So thanks everyone. I hope you have a good night. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.